Don't waste your time learning how to crochet. I mean, who really wants to spend their afternoon taking a whole bunch of yarn like this and trying to crochet it into loops to make a square or a rectangle? And yes, I did say square or rectangle because that is my skill level right now. I'm a beginner and trying to relearn how to do crochet, but I'm doing this in a bigger sense. See, I want to show you guys the true cost of hobbies. And we're not just talking about equipment cost or material cost, but we're talking about the cost of just learning the skill as well as upscaling as far as lessons and community building and also accessibility. I'm doing this because oftentimes when we see people progress in hobbies, we see them in the middle stage or later stage, either learning how to do that skill well enough where they're making videos like this to make step-by-step tutorials, or maybe they are monetizing and making a business out of their hobby. And I think sometimes it can be kind of hard as us viewers trying to learn hobbies to feel like that every time that we are trying a new skill, we have to be perfect. But I'm here to change that narrative and show you that progression doesn't necessarily mean that every single tutorial or every single thing that you're doing learning that hobby has to be perfect or it has to equal to some perfect progress at the end of the day. You can get fulfillment just learning and using your skills when you're trying a new hobby. And in this video and specifically, I'm going to start with my day one of learning how to crochet. So I'm going to show you the materials that I'm using as of right now to get started, so that way you guys know where I'm starting with. So the first thing I got is obviously yarn. So this is a crochet, not specifically for crochet, but this is a ball of yarn which I got from Walmart, which is around $5. And then I'm going to show you my crochet hook, which is right here. This cost around $4.37, and I got this from Walmart. And of course we have internet, and then we also have my laptop. So I'm going to show you guys how I am progressing as far as learning how to crochet.
Alright, so this is my first attempt creating a slip knot. Now, one hard thing for me was trying to attempt mimicking or doing the same thing on the tutorial. The first time I was having a hard time getting the angles right on the thread, but then the second time around I was able to loop inside to the hook and hold the slip knot tight. But the problem was since I was doing it really tight, it was really hard to get a good grasp on the yarn and to open up the slip knot so that I can loop the thread or loop the yarn inside the hole. So that was a really hard thing to balance, like holding the yarn as well as trying to make those loops inside the hole. Because of this issue, I never actually created a chain because I always kept on tightening the knot every time I tried to loop the yarn inside the hole. So you can see this is the attempt where I actually made the hole bigger and looped the yarn inside the hole, but then I made a mistake of tightening it really close where I wasn't able to create a second chain. So what I should have done was create that big hole, loop the yarn inside the hole, but hold at the bottom of the knot and not try to tightening it with each yarn strand. So I hope that makes sense as I do progress in this journey. Another mistake that I made was when I was attempting to loop the yarn inside the hole was that I had an issue with the hook going in between the yarn strands. So you can see that I was trying to attempt to do the same thing, having the same issues, but the hook would go in between the yarn strands and I couldn't able to put it inside the hole, or if I did, it looked like I was able to do it, but it was just not looking proper. So being mindful of where the hook is gathering the yarn, so that way all the yarn in that one single strand can go inside the hole. Another issue occurring was knots. Now, when you're doing this a couple of times, you may have some mini knots, and you can prevent the knots by undoing them. But some knots, like I didn't undo. So one way is cutting the yarn, so that way there is a knot. But another way I was trying to get over the knot issue was trying to loop like the yarn strand inside the hole, which you can do if it's big enough. So if you create a big enough hole, but I wasn't able to create a big enough hole for this knot to go inside. So I will also show you guys how I tried to go around that issue because knots can happen when you are learning to crochet. So now you can see how I am changing my technique. I'm holding more at the strand of the chain and not really at the individual yarn itself. So that way when I am looping the yarn inside the hole, it's actually going in the chain and I'm not over tightening it so that way it doesn't get inside, doesn't like undo, because that was the issue. I was trying to create a chain and then it kept on undoing itself. So that was another thing that I was learning. As you can see, I was getting a little bit better. I was getting better when it comes to making my hole big enough so that way my yarn can get inside the hole, which is very repetitive the way I'm saying it, but it does really make a difference because when you're watching tutorial videos, sometimes you get caught up in trying to mimic everything that they're doing, but sometimes you have to remind yourself of the main objective, which is if I'm trying to create a chain, I'm trying to make sure everything is aligning up properly. And so it does mean that you may have to change up your own technique, the way that you hold the yarn, or maybe changing the way that you put the yarn or yarn strand inside the hole when you're trying to crochet. So it is pretty much the same as what they're doing in their video, but it's just me trying to figure out how is the best way. Now, when it comes to the other issue that I talked about was just getting a knot inside the hole. I'm doing it again, but this time around I'm making the hole a little bit bigger. And you can see I'm looping the knot inside, but this is a very small knot, so the knot almost becomes the base of the chain once I'm able to put it inside. Now there's another technique where let's say you have a knot that's really, really big. Now let's say you tried to undo it with your fingers and it's just really hard for you to do. There is a way to put a bigger knot like this inside the hole to create a to be part of your crocheted chain. So I'll adjust the hole. So this time, how I adjust the hole is actually pulling on the strings. So if you just pull a little bit up, the hole will become a little bit bigger. And now when I'm trying to put this knot inside the hole, it will not just go inside and loop to be part of the yarn strand, but now I'm looping it inside and this is almost becoming a base. So this is a little bit more clear because you can see how this knot is really, really big. So it's able to make it inside the hole, but it's not going to be like a part of the strand, but it's almost becoming the base of the bottom as I create a new chain. Now, I'm not sure if this is like the most proper way, and you can also see my chain is not necessarily the most neatest, but if you have an issue where you just have really big knots after trying to redo your crochet chain over and over again, this could be a solution if you want to just put the knots inside your crochet chain. Now up next, I'm going to show you guys how I'm able to create the second chain or the second row in the crochet chain. Now when I was doing this, I was a little bit nervous because I was worried that I wasn't able to put the loop inside the hole of two strands of yarn. So not just one, but do two, and I was worried I wouldn't be able to undo it. So as you can see, there's two loops. So I put my crochet hook on the second hole, and then I took the yarn and pulled it through the hook through both holes. So that was kind of a hard thing to do because this was a technique that I felt like was going to mess up the chain, but in this case it really helped when it came to just making sure I was really figuring out what hole I needed to go into and not trying to get into the first hole or the same hole over again. So you can see I'm progressing and able to continue on creating this loop. Now it looks like I got it in the real time the first try, but in actuality this whole process took me like almost 3 hours trying to figure out how to chain and create this loop, because at the same time I was trying to create a single chain, I was also trying to figure out how I can loop around. So this did take time for me to learn the process of trying to create that second chain. So the video that you see here is me looking at my single chain and being like, okay, this is the single chain, but also how do I loop back so that way I can continue the progress of going down the chain, because I was worried that I was kind of making the same mistake of looping back in the same section, but I was making progress because I got a little bit excited here because it looked like I was actually moving further down the chain rather than looping in the same area. Now, another thing that could be hard for you guys to see is where is that second hole? How can you differentiate it, especially when I have black yarn and it's kind of hard to see the details. So I'm getting up close and showing you guys that actually the first hole has yarn inside. So you can see that long single strand of yarn. It's actually in the first hole. So I count that as the hole that I will not get into. And then the second hole that you'll see coming up has no yarn inside. So that's how I'm able to differentiate between, okay, so this is the hole that has yarn that I'll bring in, and then the next hole right next to it doesn't have any yarn inside. So since that already has yarn inside and my hook is there's no point for me to go back into that section. So the second hole is right next to it, is the area where I'll put my hook inside to create that second chain. So that is how it's able to differentiate, and you can